So good evening, everybody. We will go ahead and call the Sustainability Advisory Committee meeting for December to order. Will staff please call the roll?
Tomas Delgado.
Here.
Madeline Garbas.
Here.
Stacy Gloss.
Here.
Jessica Lemcool.
Here.
Andrew Stump.
Here.
Morgan White.
Here.
Grace Wilkin.
Here.
You are muted if you think we can hear you, Stacy. We cannot. Okay.
Looks like we have a quorum. We will go ahead and move on to approving the minutes from the November meeting. Everybody should have received in their packet an amended, revised minutes in an email. So that is the one that you'll be voting on. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from November's meeting?
Those weren't in the packet, so maybe we should just read out that amendment.
Absolutely. Let me go ahead and find that. Does anybody have it up handy? I would have to just go back into my email.
I have it up. I can read it.
Can you read it? Thank you, Morgan.
The addition was under the item called Report Back on Faith in Place Green Team Summit. And at the end of that couple sentences, the addition is Grace Wilkin also reported back on the Energy Master Planning Workshop, which led to a discussion on learning more about energy infrastructure and resiliency in Urbana. Grace also reported on a proposal for food waste composting at the Urbana Landscape Recycling Center with a pilot project hopefully starting in summer 2021 or later. Were there other edits? I think that was the only one.
The only one. I would motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion or other further changes? Not hearing any. Will staff please call a roll call vote?
Tomas Delgado.
Yes.
Madeline Garbas.
Yes.
Stacy Gloss.
Yes.
Jessica Lemcool.
Yes.
Andrew Stump.
Yes.
Morgan White.
Yes.
Grace Wilkin.
Yes.
Thank you. That passes. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda this evening that anybody would like to propose? Okay, thank you. We will move to public input for this meeting. I see that we have a few attendees in attendee mode as part of the Zoom this evening. If any of the attendees would like to make a public comment, please raise your hand on the screen and we will recognize you for a public comment.
I'm just here to lurk. I'm on the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Commission, and I wanted to see what y'all talked about.
Would you mind just sharing your name with us and where you're from?
I'm Sue Jones in Urbana, and again, I'm on the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Commission. I work out at Parkland and ride there every day, and figured we should know what each other were doing.
Great, thank you for joining us this evening, Susan. Glad that you're here.
Hi, Sue.
Hello, I'm eating, so my video is not coming on under any circumstances.
No problem, and also agree about our commissions
Okay.
knowing more about what each other does in our
This one here?
community.
Yeah.
All right, any other attendees this evening would like to address the commission? Okay, not seeing any. We will move on to the presentation by the Prairie Research Institute about the Prairie Research Institute geothermal grant. Do we have somebody here that's going to be presenting on that this evening?
I presume Andy is. Andy, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm trying to get my window here.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. That's not what I want. Share that.
Are you able to do a screen share?
Yeah, can you
Yeah.
see it?
Fantastic. Great. Thank you.
Sure. See if I can make that. Okay, that's good. Can you, is that good? And maybe Jay Solomon, he may be on the call. He's my PI on the grant from the Illinois Extension.
There's a Stanley Solomon?
Yeah. Mhm.
Yep. Okay.
So this is we just received this grant from U of I Extension. It's a grant, part of their collaboration program where researchers on campus collaborate with extension educators on a project that's relevant to the state. So actionable items, actionable projects. And so we decided to develop a technical and outreach program for geothermal energy for the state through the newly formed Illinois Geothermal Coalition. So I see here, Jay's on the grant with Nancy and Tushi. So objectives of the project is to develop a technical and outreach and education program that will support geothermal energy systems across the state and disseminate information for decision makers and public stakeholders about the economic, energy efficiency and environmental benefits of geothermal energy systems. So there's basically 3 activities we're planning on doing. Basically, the first one is to build a interactive dashboard, so a data delivery system that both the geothermal industry and government organizations can use. Right now we have various data sets at the Prairie Research Institute that apply to geothermal energy, and so we're going to combine them together and make one data delivery system. The second activity, we're going to develop a support tool for decision makers to be able to identify the type of geothermal energy technology that could be applied in their part of the state. It's going to be based on economic metrics, scientific metrics, engineering metrics, and the demand for thermal energy in either by county or by region, I guess. And the project will also be, like I said, an outreach education program, which will be coordinated with statewide entities that have a relevance in geothermal energy, whether they're end users, government officials, commercial entities, residential or industrial sectors. And so here's our project team, and our collaborators are various researchers, faculty, and staff on the University of Illinois campus, and some other off-campus collaborators. John Freitag, you've met him before last year. He's from the Geothermal Alliance of Illinois. Frank Holcomb, he's with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and Scott Tess, who's with the City of Urbana. So we're going to try and leverage all the knowledge bases of all these groups to help us develop this statewide program. So here's the interactive dashboard. This is the number of data points we have in one of the data sets for Illinois, and there's a couple other data sets we combine with this, and we would provide it in a usable form that's easily accessible and understandable by various levels of education, knowledge base, and end user. So we're going to make it so it can be understandable across various groups.
Andy, why so much in Southern Illinois?
Most of the data set was based on, at least this data set was based on oil and gas wells. So that's where the majority of oil and gas wells are constructed. But there are other data sets that will combine, which will be water wells, so that will be a more statewide coverage. The decision to support tool will be based, like I said, based on geology, the heating demand per county or per region, and this data is held federally by federal agencies. Also, it could be part of an economic development program, especially where there's industries converting from one, say from mining or oil and gas to some other industry. Geothermal energy could support that transition process. So, and then looking at the different technologies we have, like we are describing, or like we have for our City of Urbana program, ground source heat pumps. There's also direct use heating and cooling systems, thermal energy storage systems. So taking energy, thermal energy that's from another purpose and actually storing it in the ground for future use. Conversion of petroleum wells, oil and gas wells to store and produce geothermal energy, and use abandoned mines as a geothermal resource. And then the coordinated statewide education outreach program, maybe Jay can comment about this a bit more, but we're going to educate Illinois residents on how this geothermal energy can be part of their energy mix, including wind and solar energy, renewable energy, and explain to them what types of thermal energy uses this could provide, could offset. So basically anything roughly 150 degrees Fahrenheit and lower, you can use geothermal energy, not volcanic geothermal energy, but just the natural temperature in the ground to offset these thermal energy uses. The other important aspect of geothermal energy is the footprint. It's much less than wind or solar or other energy production systems. So it's basically underground and you don't really know it's there. And that's part of the challenge, is to educate people, because it's not visible, educate them about the benefits and the positive aspects of the technology. Okay, so that's it for me. Jay, do you have any comments?
Good evening. No, Andy, I think you did a really good job of covering most of that, or at least from what we're looking at. On the extension side, we're looking at putting this material together and having some data that we can put out there. It's known that geothermal is a good option, and there's quite a few installations out there. But as Andy said, there are those folks who don't understand how it fits into the mix, and that's the one thing I'm looking at, is how does it fit into the mix. As we're working with Energy and Environmental Stewardship team, we do some stuff. I started with wind energy, and then we're doing some stuff with solar energy efficiency as well. And bringing this into that full grid gives us the full rounded opportunity to cover all of the topics in one. So we're looking forward to adding this to our repertoire, and I'm really interested in what the city there is got going on for us to build on, to highlight as part of this outreach program. So thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you.
So I open up to any questions anybody has.
Yeah, first, Andy, the slide that you're currently on has a lot of like really neat infographics with really, really tiny writing on it right now. Are you able to
And try and
zoom in on like one at a time, each of those infographics, so we could get a little bit more of a shot of them.
So you can
There
see
we go.
that.
Thank you. Yeah. So could you just maybe do a quick little explanation of each one that you show?
So basically, I was talking about the different temperatures, the different uses and the different temperatures. And so you can see here on the left is the range of temperatures and then the use, the end user for that temperature. So we could really cover just with the natural temperature in the ground, we could cover this grouping of end users.
And I see it's a lot of industrial users in that group, which is really kind of interesting.
Yes, so there's lots of food processing, even concrete, agriculture, definitely, drying of food or drying of clothes or whatever, making ice. There's all kinds of different uses that just not even increasing the temperature, you can cover with the natural temperature in the ground.
I think that's really important to understand because a lot of people who have thought about geothermal historically in our area have thought, oh, this is not a good place for geothermal because they're thinking about those really high temperature direct use. And so there's been, and I'm just talking about from, conversations with people, not from something statistical, but there tends to be like, oh, but it doesn't make sense to do geothermal here because we don't have that, magna 10 feet down or magma 10 feet down. And so it's really important for all of us and everyone who is looking at this to understand that core part, what Andy was saying about what's naturally in the ground, that is what makes this such a great place for geothermal, but it's at that particular section of this graph, not the other section that is more
Not up here.
commonly thought of by power industry people, right? So
the city program basically, where this is this area in here, and so the geothermal system replaces natural gas that you're using in the winter to heat your house. And then it's also more efficient in the summer for cooling, even though you're using probably a little bit more electricity, the actual system is more efficient than an air conditioner. So electricity might go up for a household, but your actual efficiency is going to be better, and you're going to not use, you won't need natural gas anymore. So it has environmental benefits, plus efficiency benefits.
Could you zoom in on maybe the second image on that page?
So the one below it or the one beside it? I can just.
I think the footprint one is kind of neat, just from like a land perspective. If you want to make that one bigger, kind of think about the solar PV at my house as having a really large kind of footprint.
Because it doesn't have any really surface expression other than the heat pump in the basement or the heat pump in the building.
Mm-hmm.
It's all underground, all the pipes are underground. And they're built to be in the ground for 50 years, at least 50 years. So the pipes they use are high density plastics, which are very stable.
You had mentioned using like old mine sites. I'm assuming underground mines, but how would that kind of work? What is the?
Actually, they could be underground or surface mines. A lot of the mines are flooded after they're decommissioned, and so that however deep it is, say it's 300 feet deep or something like that, it's going to have a thermal gradient in the pool reservoir of water. So basically, you're using the warmer temperatures of the water as your heat source. So it's like using the ground except water. And then the reservoirs are surrounded by rock or soil. So
if you want to.
Here is a poster that a group of students made. I think it was for a project in 2014. So it just shows the various geothermal technologies within different types of land uses, landscapes. Oops. Yeah, it's kind of fuzzy there.
Within the extension side of things, these are the kind of things that we hope that we can make available to individuals like you and others across the state, and even some, for me, explaining it to some of my team members, this would be very helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think those are great infographics. The footprint one, I don't know, it makes it seem like solar is, has a larger footprint than coal, which I understand, I guess, space-wise, but that there's a lot more consequences. Things can coexist more easily with solar than with lights. And especially when we think about carbon footprint, especially too, I think maybe it's interesting to think about like a land footprint and compare them like that.
And it may have been they were actually, the footprint also includes land and actually the environmental footprint. Not really sure. I would say it includes both.
Well, it says acre, and I don't think that solar would have a larger footprint than coal if that were the case.
Yeah, I think it's probably just land use, using up the land.
Mm-hmm.
But it'd be good to it would be interesting to show a footprint, greenhouse gas emissions footprint.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. They had one of those at the CCNet tour about the net zero homes. They had a great footprint of different types of technology. I mean, it's all kind of rough because you have to know the very specifics to get it perfectly accurate, but I think it was talking about geothermal. That has how it connects to the different technologies.
Mm-hmm.
Another question too, if there was any way that we could intentionally incorporate some of these SAC values with justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in this particular project or grant or geothermal stuff in the community in general.
Yeah, I was thinking there might be a possibility of some kind of training program. We'd have to look at that once we go through this project and see if that's a possibility. It wasn't in the Clean Jobs Act, but I'm sure other states who've had statewide programs have had a training aspect to their programs.
One angle on that could be a focus on educating public housing authorities and others who build income subsidized housing, and making sure they're up to speed and understand this as an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And even for nonprofits, there was just recently a museum in Oak Brook that put geothermal in the house. It was an older house.
So Jay mentioned, where the city of Urbana might be at on this. And I have to say, because of Andy's efforts, the profile of geothermal in our area is just shot up from very minimal to very aware in 1 year. Well, we had the first conversation in January this year, and now we've got a dozen site assessments already through Geothermal UC. The profile of geothermal within city facilities, where we're talking in the next few years of potentially constructing some new facilities, is so much higher. And so I think that this grant funded project is really well timed, And I think this is all really good work.
Yeah, I was encouraged by the information last week. We learned that there was lots of people that weren't even actually attending the power hours that found out about it and were calling to get assessments done. So
We had 20 people at the power hour that is probably just wrapping up right now, the 6:31 today. So it's continuing to grow.
and I understand they're very good. The people attending have very good questions they're asking, so it helps the installer understand all the possible questions that they may get. So I think by the end of this, they'll know all the range of questions people have. But they were going to do some site assessments this week, or some actual marking off of properties this week. So
Great.
any other questions?
Thank you for this update. Yep. Any other
Yeah,
questions, or we're wrapping up on
just-
this one?
Just one. The process of reclaiming abandoned mines for the harnessing of geothermal energy, is that fairly common in sort of other Midwestern states, or is that somewhat of a newer sort of approach to harnessing the energy?
There's a program at Michigan Tech University. They have a old abandoned iron ore mine that they're pulling thermal energy out of. It's basically it'll be a similar type of system as a pond or a lake geothermal system, just a little bit deeper, but that's the same analogy, that you've got pipes in the water and you're just basically exchanging heat between the water and the pipe. So, or you could actually, you might be able to have a direct open loop where you're pulling the water right through into the condenser, and then you're exchanging the heat inside of the building. But usually that's a lot more tricky with chemical changes with the water as you're oxidating it. So, but usually you're actually circulating a fluid through the pipe, and then you're exchanging the heat in the water. So, but yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for those things. It's just not known, or it's not been studied enough to understand the benefits.
Thank you. That's interesting.
I didn't finish all of the geothermal power hour, but I wasn't sure if the group buy stuff has a low income assistance program like solar, if that's covered under any of that assistance.
I think there is isn't there a low income assistance program just for renewable energy upgrades?
So
Specific solar?
there is specific state monies for low and moderate income solar, but there is no state money, state incentives for geothermal.
There are a couple of electrical co-ops that have programs where you basically, they take over your system and you pay them a monthly fee. So you don't pay for the energy, you just pay for the system. And so that's a way of not having to have any funds down. You just pay it, you finance it through the cooperative, I guess.
Basically on-bill financing.
Yeah.
So that's provided by the utility.
Mm-hmm.
That's for more cooperatives or something. Does Ameren have anything like that?
Ameren does not. I don't think they have any on-bill financing. There was maybe a 6-month period where they tried on-bill financing years ago, but I don't think they have any on-bill financing of any sort at present.
It could be another interesting piece of the geothermal push too, of like legislation for, what is it, Solar for All, a geothermal for all program too. Maybe when CEJA comes out, like, gosh, I just want to see all these things. Yeah, but that could be another piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I haven't read the CEJA and the other proposed legislation. Some of them are strictly solar. CEJA is far more broad, but I don't recall whether it has geothermal included in it or not. That's probably worth a look. I don't know if there's, an opportunity to ask somebody to put it in, but yes, I agree. There's no reason to leave geothermal out of the whole range of things that have been done with FEJA.
I wonder if the energy efficiency programs from DCEO, or I guess it's EPA is, I don't know who's administering them now, but from the state, if the energy efficiency programs might allow for geothermal to get some of those incentives, since it is in some ways about efficiency.
There is, for commercial, I believe they have a, I don't know, I forget what they call it, a flexible incentive program where you can propose something that's not prescribed in other pathways. And if you do the math and show how it's going to save, they'll come up with an incentive for it. So that might be a possibility for geo. There is also a geothermal pilot incentive program that Ameren is offering for commercial right now. I don't remember the details on that.
It's up to $25,000, I think. And the USDA also has a renewable energy program, and geothermal is included in that. As long as you have, I think it's 50% farm income. I think that's the criteria for that. But I think it pays up to 75% of the cost of it. So.
Who is the, I can't remember the name of, there's an agricultural advocacy organization that I've seen around kind of Champaign-Urbana, the Land Connection.
Mm-hmm.
Might be worth talking to them for one of the geothermal power hours as a partner. Because I think that, there's clearly differences in opportunities for commercial versus residential, and then also probably differences in opportunities for industrial agricultural commercial versus just sort of normal in city commercial. It might be interesting to see if they would be interested in a presentation on this. I get the sense that some programs and incentives are kind of new in this space, or just not really kind of heard of, but sometimes that's just a matter of like, oh, we live in kind of an urban residential area, and I'm not digging far enough into what are farmers learning about programs like these, and what does it take, what are the what are the incentives, what are the issues, what are the barriers for different communities that may be outside of our kind of geographic kind of inside Urbana region. But yeah, very interesting, and thank you for the presentation and the update. It sounds like the geothermal program in Urbana has had a lot of successes already, and I think that that's really exciting in terms of the kind of, not every roof has solar, not everybody is interested in solar power. I like that this is an option as part of the energy mix, as community members are making decisions around whether or not they stay on all natural gas heating homes, switch to heat pumps, or consider a geothermal heat source. So I think these are all really interesting in terms of our energy mix for the future. So thank you for the presentation tonight.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And Andy and Scott and Maureen, everyone pushing out geothermal stuff and doing the power hours and stuff. I think it's a cool thing. I wish it would have been around because I just got a new heat pump and HVAC system like last year. So I wish that I could have had a geothermal option. I wanted one, but it was hard to find someone then. So I'm glad that it's out there for other people who might have a really old furnace as well.
Okay. The next item on our agenda this evening is just a discussion on food scrap composting, I believe, as it relates to a commercial program that may be being piloted in the future and planning for that. I think Scott or Grace, I don't know if either of you have a presentation about that or some slides, or if you just want to discuss.
This is Grace's agenda item, so Grace, feel free to take the lead.
Okay, thanks. I do have a few updates. We talked about this some last meeting, and it was in your packet too. I can kind of briefly go over, but proposing to start a pilot project at the Urbana Landscape Recycling Center to compost food scrap waste. This would be a small pilot project that would start hopefully next summer of 2021, and potentially grow from there would be awesome. But that's definitely the first step. And there'd be some advantages. It would be a cheaper dumping space than landfill for the food waste. And it would involve a private hauler, taking it from a business, like we're looking at commercial pre-consumer food waste. So say from a grocery store or restaurant, and then a private waste hauler takes it to the Landscape Recycling Center. They pay a fee there for dropping off the food waste. The Landscape Recycling Center incorporates it into their existing composting piles. And then they sell the finished compost to the community. So they've got some revenue there because they're a financially independent entity. So that's basically the summary of it. Did you have anything else to add, Scott, or the city's perspective? Because there seems to be kind of some confusion of like, where does the city come in? And it seems like just kind of more of a partnership, but I'll let you speak on it.
Yeah, so, from the perspective of a system where there's a small number of large generators, the Landscape Recycling Center's role would be essentially what their role already is, which is to accept compostable materials for a tipping fee, create a saleable product, and then sell that to the public. There's some barriers to get over for the Landscape Recycling Center. The nature of the material is a little different, so we would probably need to have a concrete pad at some cost, and then also develop policies, procedures, so forth, about when we're going to accept it, how we're going to accept it, and how we're going to handle it, and turn it into a saleable product. But not insurmountable barriers.
Have there been any conversation with a potential hauler?
Yes, that was some of my next updates from there. Dale Levitt is a family-owned waste hauling company in Urbana, and they are interested in participating in the pilot project. They have kind of like a small truck that they used for landscape waste already with their residential pickup. So they said that they could allocate that truck and some labor to what we're kind of brainstorming now is maybe once or twice a week pickup from a grocery store or restaurant, maybe one or two or whatever kind of fills up their truckload, and take that to the Landscape Recycling Center and just do that kind of small truckload once or twice a week to start out with. And then, so it's kind of like the Landscape Recycling Center, the waste hauler, and then that third piece is where we're getting the waste. And there is some interest in that. I contacted Schnucks in Urbana, and they're interested in the pilot project, and they'll review it amongst themselves. Also had a good meeting with people from the University of Illinois today, and talking with them about, sounds like there's definitely a possibility. Sounds like Morgan can definitely speak more, but from the others that the University of Illinois already has a lot of great solutions for that dining hall food waste, and there's still some pre-consumer food waste from other places that could go into this project, and that they already have a fleet of vehicles and could self-transport and things. Did you have other things to add to
Is this only, would this only accept pre-consumer waste, food waste?
I think for now that would definitely be easiest, because then we don't have to deal with as much of other things getting in there. Because I think that my understanding is that the Landscape Recycling Center is not willing to take on the labor of sorting through stuff.
Contamination is a huge concern. What happens is materials go through a screener and contamination is screened out. In the process, you end up with a lot of what would otherwise be saleable product also gets screened out. And all of that goes to the landfill. And that's a substantial cost expense to the business. We deal with that now. We have a certain amount of contamination that we have to screen out. But if that increases, there's a limit to how much increase in contamination we can accept and still cover all the expenses of the operation.
What is the screener? Is it like, it's like sifters or certain size, or if it's too much details, we can talk about it later, but I've been curious of that.
I don't know the answer to that.
We'll ask Kevin. Because we were talking
usually the ones I've seen, I don't know what they're doing at the LRC, but the ones are typically, they look like a screen. Like you picture the chicken wire fence, and then there's different sizes of holes.
Yeah, just wondering
box.
What size that is, and about the different materials.
Is one of the post-consumer concerns like around, if you got, I don't know how food is sold on campus, but if you bought an apple and it contained like plastic around the apple and they get rid of the apple core, then they also throw away the plastic in the same container as the other materials. So we could end up with a lot of extra plastic garbage as well with post-consumer. Do they do any post-consumer on campus at all, or they don't, Morgan?
So, okay, just to pause and talk about what we're doing on campus, we have within the dining halls, we have very high control over what happens with the food waste. And so there's staff that are trained are handling the food, both pre-consumer and post-consumer. And we collect all of the food waste. Post-consumer, the people who eat at the dining halls actually put their, not the tray, but there's no trays, but they put their plate on a conveyor belt and it goes back to the staff, right? So they can scrape it and keep, there's certain kinds of foods that are more difficult to handle than others. And I don't actually know the details about how they separate it out, but they keep napkins, for example, out of that pile.
Got it.
And so that's the separation and the contamination. Like you don't want the plastic fork that someone got from with their McDonald's to go in with their half-eaten cheeseburger into the food waste pile. And
also so-called compostable manufactured products like corn-based forks. They don't compost very fast in our facility, and it just ends up getting screened out as garbage.
Okay.
And then we have a couple of tiny compost collector spaces in non-dining facilities. There's one that Professor Jessica Brinkworth does in Davenport Hall it's great. She trains her staff in her research lab on how to compost, why to compost. They do it themselves. She does the training, and then they bury those compost bricks in the garden that is between the building and the parking lot on the Matthews Street, Davenport Hall. And that is our a carbon garden pilot project. And it's, they want to do another one. There's one that the students, that was funded by the Student Sustainability Committee. And another one that was funded but hasn't been implemented yet is at ICEE, the Institute for Sustainability, Energy and Environment, that Meredith Moore is taking the lead on. But the funding came through right at the beginning of the pandemic. So it's kind of waiting for people to have food in the building, to be in the building in order to have food in the building in order to collect it. And then we do yard waste composting and various things with animal manure. But the remainder of food outside of the dining halls, for the most part, the remainder of it is going to the landfill right now. But it's in that post-consumer world. There are a few places, and I think this is what Grace was referring to, where there is a controlled environment for pre-consumer food waste that's not through university housing. So for example, one great example is the Bevere Cafe. Bevere Hall is where food science and health nutrition is. They have a cafe. They have done several sustainability things, and they're interested in getting involved in food scrap management, such like this. So that might be an option. There's some other places like the Beckman Institute has its own cafeteria that are outside of what dining services manages.
Morgan, remember there was also the other group a couple years ago that was going to, proposed a composting system, I think for agricultural waste, for crop waste, but they didn't get funded. It was like going to be a specialized composting system. So they might be interested in this too.
I think this is specifically looking at how to start something for food waste, right? And the pilot is about food specific.
I think they were going to take food waste with this system, but.
Well, we've done a couple of studies, and one of the studies was about implementing a large scale food waste windrow composting on campus. And like Scott was mentioning, you'd have the permit requirements included having concrete underneath that space. So there was the need to build concrete, to install concrete. And there's logistical things that need to get worked through. It sounds like the ideas that Grace, you've put together here, I think they are good steps to like figure out how to do some of these things, because the hauling is one of the issues. Just the logistics. How do you get the garbage, the food waste from here to there? And then food scrap's pretty messy. It tends to stick to things. So there's a matter of like, you got to wash out the container. So if they have this truck, how do they keep that operating appropriately without dripping like food grease down the street? And then there's the identifying what can go in there and training the users. We did not have the operational support to get the windrow composting set up in the way it was going to happen back in 2012. And so I canceled it. And we focused in on the grind to energy system that dining is implementing across campus in dining halls right now that goes to the sanitary district. And the sanitary district then creates renewable energy with it. They put it through their anaerobic digester, which is used to run their facility. The other thing that we looked at was building an anaerobic digester on campus that would also take the food waste from campus and the yard waste and the manure. And we did a study at the beef and sheep facility looking at all of the organic wastes generated on campus and what sort of production capacity of clean energy we could get from that, and then how that could be used. Because there's two options, essentially two options. One is that we could convert it to, we could run it through a generator and get some electricity, or we could take the captured methane and upgrade it to compressed natural gas to be used to run our fleet vehicles, which is much better. And once you have the facility, it's more cost effective than gasoline. And so that was actually, and is still, the primary intention for the large scale food scraps on campus. And we are looking at where could it go and how could it be funded. And the most recent plan, it's not defined and locked in or anything, but sort of direction is to get an anaerobic digester in a future dairy facility as part of the campus master plan. Moves the College of ACES to the ACES Legacy Corridor on South Lincoln and South Race Street. And we have recommended that from the sustainability side that when the college does move forward with that dairy facility, that they incorporate an anaerobic digester. But again, that would be for the on-campus food waste. I mean, I think from my perspective, and not speaking on behalf of the university, but from my perspective, I think the idea of piloting what the city can do with city organizations, with non-university organizations is actually really beneficial. I'm not saying that we shouldn't look at the university food generators, but I think there's a whole lot of others that are quite possibly interested in this and would be able to, I'm always looking for ways to bring more people into the conversation. You know, if we could, if Schnucks is interested and, you know, the other stores, there's multiple Schnucks, then there's Walmart and Meijer and other stores, there's, and then there's restaurants. Some of our, like, the restaurants that are prioritizing using local food, and say, well, that's excellent. Now you also need the other side of that about composting the food waste. So that's my perspective.
Definitely, thank you. Yeah, something else I've been thinking about is, especially for the pilot project, since it would have to be, you know, a little more limited, of how that also ties in with these JEDI goals. And I think that it would be good to focus on community stuff too, and locally or regionally owned businesses, Black, Indigenous, people of color owned businesses. So that's something I've been reflecting on too, and I would like to reach out to some more of those places in Urbana and present the opportunity instead of just going to the go-tos of the University of Illinois, Schnucks, Walmart, and, you know, those are the groups I've been talking with so far, but I definitely would like to expand it, and it seems like that would be great to give them some of the first kinds of opportunity, and especially with the hauler too. It sounds like Dale Levitt, waste hauler, is really excited about the program too, and I wouldn't want to like take that from them and say like we're just going to do this with the University of Illinois, because it sounds like they're fortunate to have a lot of great resources and can figure out lots of solutions to these things, whereas some of these other businesses might not have that opportunity without having something provided by the city, or, you know, not provided by the city, but, you know, available to them.
Do we have any costing out of what a concrete pad would cost, and siting and location or anything like that for the land, not landfill, but for the landscape recycling center facility?
A rough estimate is $3,000 to $5,000.
And I don't know if you saw in the email earlier today too, Scott, but Susan from the Champaign County Environmental Stewards has been our awesome grant writer in that organization, and she's interested in getting on some grants for that too.
Great, thank you for the updates. Any other questions on the subject?
Thanks for the presentation, Grace. I had just a thought that maybe approaching Dale Levitt to get a sense of what other sort of non-household contracts they have, to sink in more of their own clientele system to this could be a good option. The township building has contracts with Dale Levitt. That's our disposal service. So yeah, thinking of just maybe approaching them to maybe talk about other contracts that they may have that may be suitable for this. And then in the idea of grant seeking for an idea like this, I'm wondering if, well, I'm certain that this sort of a system would be eligible for certain like food system grant opportunities that are seemingly pretty popular nowadays. So maybe just another thing to think about. And yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, just wanted to share just to keep updated, because it seems like something that would be, you know, that's up the SAC's alley. And if you have other ideas and resources or connections to share, that's awesome. I don't think I have immediate like SAC help with this immediate thing, but all of the resources and, you know, why everyone's here would be great. So if you have other thoughts or want to be involved in other conversations, please let me know.
Okay. Our next agenda item this evening is to go back to our unfinished business conversations that we've been having for kind of a while, a few of our months, which includes the discussion of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion as goals. In the last meeting, we had a brainstorming session for the commission members to think about different ways to approach JEDI goals and to think about what some of our goals could be. So everyone should have received the kind of, we put it all on a whiteboard, but that has been turned into a document. And I would like to open up that discussion this evening to both review that whiteboard document and then to have a discussion around some next steps and some ideas around next steps and the approach to take in funneling, maybe funneling in on, I don't know if that's the right way to say that, but prioritizing some of these goals into categories that that you all can come up with if you would like to do that. I think that some of the categories are, in my mind, there's ways that we can think about this: short-term, medium-term, long-term kind of goals. There's also the, within the capacity of the commission, within the capacity of the sustainability office versus items that may be outside the capacity of the office. And maybe some, creative thinking around things that might be outside the capacity for how we might address items. And then we might just think about things as like, actually some items feel like these are really important, not as, or whatever. So I think that there are a multiple number of ways to think about the kind of exercise and to think about the goals, some of which I just outlined. So I would like to hear from commission members on what some of your kind of ideas or preferences would be for next steps with this process. We have a little bit of time this evening. We did put 30 minutes on the agenda. I'll hold us to keeping this discussion to finalize this discussion for this evening around 8:30 based on the time. So with that, we are just kind of open for discussion.
As far as next steps, something that I was thinking about that would make sense in my mind would be to kind of categorize or group some of these together. Like instead of by person, put it more by kind of category or something like that, and a big like mind map idea web is what my mind goes to. And there's also some other cool resources of just like basic things to look for, like sustainable cities and municipalities, and kind of measuring like where we are and where we can go.
I agree. I think that's a great idea, Grace. I'm not sure what you're saying about there's other resources, right, where we are, but the aspect of organizing this a little bit around what are we saying? And we could, I think it doesn't matter that much who said it, except for us to be able to find it later and ask a question. I do have a couple questions about what some other folks wrote. If I could do that, maybe that would, I'd like it to understand the, so Andy, you said something here that I was hoping you could just explain a little bit more. What do you mean when you say a whole person perspective? And for people watching, it's, you said focus on sustainable and clean communities from a whole person perspective.
That was actually me.
Okay.
So I guess, I don't know, something that, and I'm always gonna just come at this, like, I guess, kind of from a school perspective, but just thinking about, in schools, we always talk about the whole child, right? And I just think even environmental stuff just kind of relates to like the whole person, thinking about what's going to actually work for people in their schedules and with their lifestyles, and what's going to actually be beneficial for them on a day-to-day basis when we're thinking of ideas that we're trying to push out to the community. So yeah, just keeping in mind like how much things cost to participate in, or like access to things or time, and just really considering like what, if we're wanting, you know, if we're trying to push an initiative, what is this really going to be like for people, and how are we going to make it work for them? And that's kind of what I was trying to say. If that explains a little bit more. Sorry for being.
That does. I appreciate it.
Sorry about that. I got in the wrong order.
Yeah, and on that vein, like just thinking about things that are going to help people not, you know, feel happy, healthy, like mental health, like all aspects of a person. I think we're so deeply rooted and connected to our environment, and sometimes like we're disconnected, right? And that disconnection is hard on people. You know, I've noticed my students that don't get to go outside that much during the pandemic are struggling more than the kids are noticing. They're like, I went outside and I felt so much better. So just really thinking about kind of all levels of a person, their health, their mental health, you know, their financial, where they're at financially, and all of that when we're thinking about doing things.
So the other question I had was for Stacy. You said, or it says you said, receive periodic updates from townships. So what were you? What, to me, the township, there are a few different townships in the city limits, and there's multiple townships around the county. And so I was not sure who you meant and updates about what.
That's a really great question. I believe I was thinking about Cunningham Township in specific in terms of updates. You know, I don't have a specific program in mind, but if Tomas wanted to share more, I know that he does some work with the township on areas of sustainability that wanted to come up and that we wanted to discuss. Like, I'd be open to that. I think, yep, that is totally up for kind of discussion and to kind of figure it out. But I thought that from an SAC perspective, for now, from, you know, two things that I think that I kind of think that I know are kind of happening in Urbana with the Cunningham Township were the Solidarity Gardens, and also some work around like work around housing and kind of housing justice. And at least on those two topics, getting just learning more and understanding what our community faces in these areas would just be maybe helpful for me to kind of conceptualize what are some of the challenges and the barriers in our community, and also to hear about some of the awesome programs that are happening. So with, for example, the Solidarity Gardens, how many pounds of food were made, how many different people participated in that program, how many gardens were there this past year, and maybe that information comes through Danielle Chenoweth's updates during the township board meetings that are held at the city of Urbana. And so it could be that we should just be getting information there. I don't want to create something that's duplicative, but I think that there's probably things that are relevant to learn about and share information for.
I've been thinking.
But,
No, you go, Thomas.
I was just going to say that Danielle does a pretty good job at just disseminating the current information that the township's involved with monthly at those meetings. But when I saw that add it to your list. I was just thinking about, well, just within the last recent years, the township has kind of prided itself on being a sort of no wrong door for folks in need, and to really be integrated into the social service network here in Champaign-Urbana. So since the SAC is a Urbana-focused group, just getting a better sense of the current experiences and challenges of low-income folks within the city, and very recently those challenges have been intersected with utility access, and throughout the last year, food access, which are all obviously have intersections to sustainability. So that's how I kind of received that that item on your list. But yeah, I mean, I would certainly be up for talking about how to maybe not every meeting, but like more periodically kind of give you at least some sort of a summary on what challenges are and how they may be, how solutions may be talked about from at least our group.
Awesome. Yeah, what I was thinking about as far as like generally thinking about data too, with kind of realistic measurable goals and just in general, especially I was looking at some resources online and kind of like evaluating a city's equity, diversity, justice, and inclusion. And a lot of it is really data driven, and especially, if we're looking at like racial or income data. So I'm just wondering like what information we have available to us through the city, the township, the courts, the police, the services, the utilities, just all of that kind of data. I'm just wondering like what's available and what are we able to measure if we were to kind of like evaluate Urbana, because that could be another interesting thing too, that even if it's saying, this is outside of the scope of the SAC, but we're interested in compiling some of this data and like evaluating how does Urbana rank on a sustainability kind of profile.
In terms of demographic data, I think what we have is what everyone has, which is census data. I would add one other thing to that. We do have what the city calls community development target areas, which is census data, low income census blocks with predominantly student census blocks removed, as those students aren't low income in the way that we're thinking about. They're just not reporting income because they're in school. But I think what we have is essentially census data available to everyone. Just off the top of my head, thinking about what I know about.
Yeah, even though like the one you shared, they asked like, kind of like racial representation or gender representation in the city commissions and like appointed positions. And I just don't know what kind of data on that's available, if that's something we've been tracking. Anyway, when I'm looking at these evaluation methods, I'm just wondering, like, do we have that data available?
Sure. So I don't know if the city has demographic data on employees. My guess is, since no one's ever asked me for it, that we're not compiling demographic data for boards and commission members. Maybe that's something we could and should do, but I can't answer it for employees, and I'm pretty confident the answer is no for commissions at present.
This in part is sort of reminding me about the U of I students from iMatter that brought a climate report card to the SAC and also presented it to the city of Urbana. To the extent that I have not read the resources that were provided today, I haven't had an opportunity to do that yet. To the extent that there's a resource for compiling data and information into a report card, that seems in the kind of I don't know, environment of education that we have with the university, and a lot of people that are sort of focused a lot on performance and grades, that report cards are one way that get people's attention in this community and could lead to some sort of action. At least in one small way that a climate report card led us to take action was by adding a youth seat onto this commission. And Maddie is on that seat. Also, Maddie, feel free to kind of join in. I know that you were not here in the last meeting, but if you would like to share some of your ideas as well about what sustainability issues you see kind of at the schools and in the community that from your perspective, that we would also love to hear that.
I'm trying to, I've kind of pieced together a little bit of what's going on. It was totally my bad for not attending the last meeting. I was doing another like volunteer thing, so that was totally my bad. But anyway, so I'm sorry, I'm not entirely getting what the whiteboard is entirely.
I can back up just to kind of let you know. So at the last meeting a couple weeks ago, we put up like a Zoom whiteboard in the Zoom, and everybody took like their own corner of that whiteboard and they typed out all of these ideas that you are now seeing typed up in order with different people's names by them now. And so what we were doing is we were thinking about our ideas and priorities around ways that would be goals for us to address diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in Urbana. And so all of these sentences that are being shared in the screen that we're viewing right now are what everybody just sort of brainstormed on and wrote down quickly kind of on paper about what were the issues that were the ones that they were thinking about. Does that kind of help for kind of background of how we got to this point?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So like, I guess, I'm sure I'm probably having about as much to think about it as you guys got last time. You know, some of this stuff, so it's really like, obviously I haven't talked to like anybody in school in terms of like because of COVID and stuff like that. So I'm not really sure like how Urbana is even being run right now. So I can only speak to like past experience. But I mean, I would definitely say that like people are not very knowledgeable at all about like the city in general. So I see, you know, like that you wrote, Stacy, creating an About Your City program for school children at 4th and 5th grades. I really personally like that idea because I know that when I was in 4th and 5th grade, I wasn't entirely sure why trees were super important. So like, in terms of like I think it's really important to educate people.
Definitely. Good one.
You know, one of the things that I saw in Jessica's comments was similar about bringing in the youth. And it's just, it's so important and it's so easy to forget. And, you know, we had several conversations about the Youth Sustainability Summit, and then the second one, the Climate Justice Forum. And I mean, I'm an administrator. I'm not much of a youth mentor. I try, I care, but it's not in my inherent wheelhouse. But I really appreciated that the message that we got, it was a while ago, about the need to have the youth, you know, invite them and bring them in, but also, you know, set them free, let them have leadership opportunities and control over.
Yeah, I know that there's so much passion about this with people my age. I know there's passion about it, but like nobody is being told or knows where to exactly put it.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I just read in the News Gazette the other day that I thought was really interesting was that there were a cohort of young women who have joined the Boy Scouts in town. If maybe other people saw the News Gazette article, but some of the projects that the young women were leading around getting their Eagle Scout badge, but getting to that level of Eagle Scout, were projects that some of them had to do with community gardening and monarch butterflies and planting pollinator gardens. And these are things that we talk about a lot, about kind of environment and even about the SAC. I think it could be really interesting to have even just more connection and possibly even invite some of the young folks from the community to even provide us some presentations about what projects they've been working on and about what excites them.
On this note, like, I just think, you know, there's like getting to the schools is getting to like the city. So, you know, basically it could just be a really powerful thing if we were able to offer resources to our local schools on ways that they could educate students. I know personally, I've had year after year, watching a documentary clip, and kids are just mind blown at what's happening to our planet. And this is at the middle school level. At the high school level, there's plenty of kiddos that are just super aware and ready to get out and do something. And, you know, some schools don't even have simple things like recycling, and that's an easy, you know, win. So there are just probably limitless ways that we could involve students in this. And I would be excited to work on finding resources and creating resources and working on that. So.
Yeah, I remember when I was in the middle school, there I don't remember why. It was because student council, I think, but they had recycling, and they made like 2 students, I think, were chosen to collect the recycling from different hallways. And that sounds super boring, but it was actually super fun. So like even doing chores was kind of fun in terms of like, because you got to get out of class and you got to like lift the paper and you got to go see people you didn't normally get to see. So I know, like I said, I know it sounds boring, but like it's kind of those kinds of things that people are like, oh, I wouldn't want to do that. Like kids don't know that it's not cool.
We do that at Edison all the time and with student council, and they love it. But also students throw candy wrappers and stuff, and we only have paper recycling. So it's just with the waste disposal, there's so much waste that comes out of a school, like especially now with these bagged lunches, they come in a plastic bag and everything inside it is plastic. So there's just a lot of room for growth that we could potentially be, you know, helpful in that process of growing in our schools.
So if we have about 10 minutes left for some dialogue, I'd like to kind of move in a direction of like, how would we want to take what is on this page and start distilling it into programs or kind of concepts and eventually.
Do you mean distilling it into actions?
Distilling it into action? I know that that's we're going to get to that point eventually. We're not going to get there in 10 minutes, but what are some ideas that move us in that direction?
I think Grace's idea of categorizing does kind of make sense. We have like communication things, energy initiatives, waste related initiatives. I don't know, that might be helpful. There are some things that are mentioned twice, so activism could be another category.
And like some guiding principles, maybe like the part about the whole person.
Is there anyone that would be excited and would want to volunteer to?
I'm gonna volunteer, because but only if you give me like until January, like January 1 or something.
I don't think we're even having a January meeting, so I think you have until February.
Then I sign me up. I just to categorize it and email it back to you guys. or to Scott to share with the commission.
And I'd be happy to collaborate too, Morgan. I started playing with like Word web software and stuff to like make it all graph.
For this file, you've already started?
Yeah, I don't have it like filled out yet, you know, like I haven't put in the words, but I've just got like empty Word web.
Okay, yeah. Let's Grace and I'll come back with a categorized list.
Great, and then present on that in February.
Yes.
Awesome.
Can we include maybe what we would recommend as like a step to take for each of them too, or for some of them? I don't know, Grace, if are you willing to do that?
Yes, I think
Like
so.
a suggestion for discussion. Yeah.
Like under each category, kind of.
Like. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've got sub bubbles coming off of them already. Yeah.
Are you thinking, Morgan, that some of those suggestions would be like maybe process oriented, like how SAC could be involved with that, you know, that objective? Or is that later on down the road?
Well, more like, here's something that we'd like to see happen, and then in the conversation we could talk about how it could happen.
Okay.
Like the one on the screen right now that is create an About Your City program for school children, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very specific, like, do this thing. And then we could set that, so I wouldn't necessarily make a new one related to that. But my idea is we would have that as an action item, you know, as a to-do item, and then we could discuss how to go about that. What is it that SAC can do for that? Who on SAC can contribute to that? And what is it that exists now? And what do we, you know, how do we get the teenagers to write the to write the program for the grade schoolers?
So I really like the idea of categorizing the information. I really like the ideas about kind of making the suggestions of how you could do it. One more added layer that I'm kind of thinking of is to indicate in some way if an idea seems like it could be low-hanging fruit. Maybe you put like a little apple or something next to an item that seems like it's low-hanging fruit that could be done fairly easily. I don't know if we want to.
You know, from that perspective, I really love the, like, just categorizing things. Like, if we make this into a list of to-do items, then there's the easy, easy or hard, cheap and expensive, complicated and straightforward, and all those pieces that can help. I mean, we could put numbers. You put 0 and 1s, and then you highlight and you order. It's gonna be so much fun.
Yeah, or even by term, you know, short, medium, long-term goals.
Mm-hmm.
Grace and Morgan, I know 3 can be a crowd, but if you want a third to help out with this, I would gladly help. I love
We're not
collabing.
allowed to.
I know we have this rule where it's just a point of
The Open Meetings Act.
as part of the Open Meetings Act, is that because we only have like a 7-person board, we do have an open seat right now. So basically, any more than 2 people having a discussion constitutes a meeting. And then the point at which, if Morgan and Grace had a conversation where they did some work on a document, this gets really in the weeds, but if they did the work on a document and then if they like shared that with another person prior to the meeting, if that information had any back and forth discussion, then we get into the, you know, it could look like that we are violating the Open Meetings Act.
Well, I'm not completely through that training yet, so I am sorry for making that suggestion.
No, you're totally fine, and I'm not even sure that the trainings go that deep. But
It's feeling pretty deep.
Mhm.
lot of text.
so we could like Morgan and I could work together and then send it too, or it could be like 2 of us work for a bit and then like 2 others, or no.
Nope, I think it has to come back to a meeting first.
Okay.
Okay, so
Which means that things move a little bit slowly, which I understand can be frustrating. But it's kind of part of the process. And I think that the course that is being outlined here is a good one. Other comments? We have a few minutes.
can we,
So
I'm sorry, one short, sorry, I don't know who said something, but can we, can the commission members feel free to send suggested actions that occurred to them by reading this to me alone or to Scott, who could compile them and share them with me and Grace?
I was going to offer that as well. Yes. So if people have specific reactions that they want to share about their whiteboard or about ideas that are really, you know, jumping out and saying like, this is important and I want to work on this. If you could send those to Scott, that would be really great. And he can then share that with Morgan and Grace.
And we'll include them.
And that way too, so Maddie, if you wanted to make your own list at this point, not saying that you have to, but if you wanted to contribute to this list in some way, that your input is still welcome here.
And for those of you watching from home, you also can send suggestions to Scott and he can share them with us. We would be happy to include additional suggestions from non-commission members.
Okay, anything else on this particular agenda item? I'm using the pause here to go back to the agenda. I have to find it on my screen. There we go. Okay. We will move into announcements. And just so folks, just so commissioners know, number 8 on the agenda is commissioners reports. To add a commissioner's report, if you have something that you want to report on in that section, then you can email me kind of before the meeting and let me know that you have an item that you want to discuss in the commissioner's report, or ask for an agenda amendment or addition to the agenda for that section for the meeting. So with that, are there any announcements? Okay, we do have one on here, which is that the Sustainability Advisory Commission still has an immediate opening for a commission member seat. And to apply to be a member of the SAC, you can fill out an application on the Urbana website. And that you can also find my contact information on there if you would like to email and ask any questions about joining the SAC. All right, we won't be seeing each other really until, as a group, until 2021. So I hope that everybody has a nice set of holidays and a happy new year. And we look forward to seeing y'all in February. Have a great evening. With no further business, I call this meeting adjourned.